After watching The Little Mermaid, I took it upon myself to watch the internet's reactions to slowly gauge what was going to come out of it. And to no surprise, it was divisive as ever, and I really wanted to talk about that a bit more today. Because make no mistake, I've already made it clear that this movie is another awful pile of trash along with the rest of the big Disney remakes, making the most stupidest decisions that don't understand their own movie, where I'm also getting very tired of the same criticism surrounding the movie that contribute to this racial or diversity arguments instead. Because all of these issues stem from Disney's modern choices in films. The ones that people actually discuss are either woke or just defending criticism towards it as racist. The exact type of reactions that Disney was exactly looking for when making a film like this to promote it in theaters. The reality that is actually present here is that they actually don't care about this. They care about you going out of your way to see it and making them money in theaters because they would win regardless of the outcome to get views and attention. A situation that has actually turned out for the worse in the past few days, with the criticism of the movie actually being overshadowed to the choice of casting a black Ariel that is now perceived to be a reason of failure in Asian markets where the movie is actually a box office failure. And this video is just meant to remind people the point of this outrageous behavior of both sides in arguments that hardly focus on the real issue instead, regardless of the outcome of who Ariel was going to be. Like if you still didn't cast Halle in the role, for example, the movie would have sucked just as bad because of the stale acting that was delivered all around and exactly what it misses the point of the original story. I mean, in my review, I made it clear that actors like Javier Bardem give lackluster performances for the characters that they are trying to portray from the original that make the story suck in more ways than one. And of course, there are various people and channels sticking to one side of an argument of discourse pertaining to toxic fans or racism that actually removes any meaningful conversation to why these films are the way that they are. Of course, the primary reason for this is of course views. It's just easy to make topics 10 times surrounding the same exact trending movie because everyone knows about it. And right now, I just want to make it very clear about everything I've said to this movie is that I think Halle is a great person who's delivered the songs well, but I absolutely hated her lackluster acting in various scenes that are supposed to be emotionally high like the others in the original, where the direction was just delivered in this piss poor delivery and adapting what already worked from before, where it is just sad it had to be this way because the most of the casting decisions is done out of Disney's desperate corporate pandering to modern American audience that doesn't actually work with the rest of the world, and of course the context of the original story, removing one piece from one story and replacing it with something rather than having an original work that would better service the story and the actors and the characters, and how Disney has just set up an eternal divisive argument for their movies that are supposed to be an escapism that anyone could enjoy, but are now just done for the sake of views and money, just like these various channels. In particular, the focus is taking various articles and interviews out of context, ripping apart minor conveniences that is more important to ones like the financial performances of the movie that the international box office is reacting to very poorly, where it just makes gross generalizations of what is happening in various interviews that the main actors are making, and only stories that fuels the fires of the culture war arguments rather than focusing on the more important issues at hand. And like I said, this is all done for views and money rather than a critique of the art itself, demonstrated by doing it before and after, pertaining to trailers, to articles, to whatever that surrounds the movie or popular topics at the time. Where I admit that videos like this get views as I have focused on the topic as a whole, but only is done for the attention of the issues of changing things that don't need to be changed in the story, the misunderstanding of the animation, and the developing story that lacks any reason for it to be justified in the way it is now. The main reason I make these is to have that real comparison side by side of what the story is trying to communicate. And when you look at that very deeper, such as the Your Movie Sucks review of The Lion King, my favorite YouTube video ever, you understand why these movies are so baffling awful regardless of casting choices or diversity arguments that stem from this multi-billion-dollar corporation. And what's even worse is these channels argue out of this political side of every single excruciating detail of Disney, comparing it to like Mario's success, where even before Mario came out, certain channels of this very type made videos complaining that it was woke, then later forgetting about that video at all, portraying it as anti-woke because the story was just simply Mario on screen and nothing more than a movie that pays tribute to the games itself and nothing more, where the critics were actually right in saying it had no story, but I didn't think it was completely bad for that, but stupid to consider that it pertains to wokeness to appeal to viewers as the story is lackluster in various ways. And just to remind you, this isn't to excuse any of the corporate actions of Disney at all, where I agree in the sentiment that Disney panders to the woke mindset, but all for the wrong money-making reasons rather than trying to tell an interesting story. It isn't a bad thing for having such ideals, but it has to flow well within the story, or without it, it just becomes a big mess that makes them 10 times worse for doing so to begin with. But what's even worse than that is the fact that there are so many channels that argue out of this mindset every single day on a trailer, on the news, or whatever relates to the situation, where you just have to keep making these videos that have a negative intent to this. The comments really agreeing, adding to the fuel to the fire that intensifies both sides rather than coming to an agreement or discussion about what we like or dislike about the various choices. It just removes any discussion discussion or conversation from the movie because that is not the focus of that very video, like focusing hardly on Rotten Tomatoes reviews as the metric whether you disagree with most of it or brush it off as paid by Disney when Disney doesn't even own 1% of the site like it at all is pretty stupid. Like, I would agree that it is weird that the verified audience gave it a 95%, but I also do agree with the verified critic score and the regular critic score on par with several other remakes that Disney doesn't have the best track record at all anyways. I mean, even the Mulan remake has a higher score than The Little Mermaid, which is literally one of the most terrible films ever made, where despite even positive or negative reviews where the site actually changes things, which I agree, it just brushes aside any criticism or reviews to conform to one side, and I don't like it at all. I know I shouldn't talk about this because I focus on the movies itself, but when the situation presents itself like this, it's hard not to try and create a more level-headed understanding of certain opinions and choices that the movies make. And going to the other side, considering the performances and opinions of Asian audiences or other countries, they brush it off as racism is pretty pathetic and stupid to make. To generalize why people are actually hating this movie, where some are actually justified in some people's cultural opinions, but not all concerning various different types of people. It removes any attention to the valid criticism once again on that side that the movie wants, defending all the choices of a mega corporation for shallow representation when originality really exists out there instead. It's fine to enjoy the movie, but for some to attack others solely on the surface level of racism is stupid and only fits into Disney's real decision to make this movie for their attention and money, no matter the type, without any real care for the story in its anyways, because it's already been done before. I've shown many times that Disney has decided to play it safe on multiple occasions or make decisions solely out of money, and this one is actually no different to that at all. It just blindly removes anything I or anyone else talks about in the grand scheme of the movies for the sake of it. Once again, here I have to mention my criticisms of the movie and how they changed key moments in the film to prop up characters like Ariel when it wasn't needed to be. Things like the change in understanding that King Triton had to go through so that both worlds could actually be connected, how the choices of Scuttle being underwater removes the rebellious attitude of Ariel by keeping her sheltered below, enslaved to the law being established underwater, rather than a strong independent woman who makes her own choices that her father actually never understood. I know it feels redundant to bring up these same choices once again, but understanding that is crucial that most people overlook on the surface because they think it looks stunning regardless of the criticism, where I really do see why they would actually think so, but for me, being a fan that I am of these movies, know how heartless this movie's decisions are and how the intention is destroying animation as a medium, as I found several on the internet somehow deemed this superior and overlooking the fact of the original just because it's animated, where beyond that there is no reason to actually watch that film because this one instead actually stands out, and saying that completely misses the mark of what work actually went into these very stories, the passion that actually went into it, where this was the movie that actually revived Disney into what we know of now, that without it you wouldn't actually have this at all, where it wouldn't really work or have been as successful. And this doesn't excuse the various issues that pop up in different countries, because there are plenty who actually think this way pertaining to Black Ariel and racism that stings in Asia, but I also don't know too much about the culture in those countries or have a full understanding about that, so I really don't feel assured to actually talk about it. What I do know is that various people in those countries are actually talking about why the movie sucks as is, pertaining to the acting, the CGI, and all the visuals that actually goes into making it. How people are still being ignorant to the fact that they just find the movie to be still as is. Nothing about it actually looks appealing beyond the fact it is a remake of a classic story, where without any context to it, it kind of looks weird to be honest, and that's what I thought about it. But I can't argue that this wasn't going to happen, where no matter how popular something is, it will always get this kind of attention, and that's just the way society is going to be okay with. I just hate how the state of the world only conforms to one identity, whether it be woke or anti-woke, or calling out criticism as racism, or not agreeing with all the casting choices that is not good enough for them, while overlooking the actual criticism of Disney's stupid practices in their very movies that takes away any meaning from actual telling interesting original stories, or the actual stories that they do have that many people have overlooked because of the pertaining to certain issues that actually blow up in popularity in the media. I just want people to realize that we go into these films with such criticisms because we love the original movies, we love what stories they produce and what they can do with it, and care that we see them succeed for the passion for what once was originally founded, where they no longer understand those facts and use them for their own financial benefits instead. And I believe if this continues the way it was, and we will no longer see any of these quality films anymore because of their insistence of both sides continuing to perpetuate this argument rather than coming together to actually make it work. And I will admit, I don't consider myself to be smart on any actual topic, so anything I say can be taken with a grain of salt of understanding because the cultural issues that everyone keeps focusing on, where I just rather would talk about the movie itself for the sake of being a movie and what it tries to present to us for being a story that people can actually enjoy. And of course, besides that, when it comes to other countries, Disney does stop caring about various political issues to turn the most profit profit demonstrated by their pathetic actions making Mulan, because they will continue to not understand it because they no longer care about making good stories. With that said, that's all I have to add, so I'm all done. Goodbye.